cloud. Share screen.
In this session, I want to talk to you on the subject, how I learned to connect with people. And whether you're listening to this audio or DVD, watching it, this is an auxiliary of my book, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. It's a book really about how to connect with people. Everybody talks, but when you think about it, very few people really grab you emotionally, mentally, to the place where they really connect with you. And I've thought so often about the fact that we spend so much time, we're trying to communicate to our boss, we're trying to communicate to our family members. It's so important in our life, and yet nobody's ever connect with people. So that when you're done talking, you realize that some value is going to come forth out of that process. And so I want to talk to you about it, and I want to read to you, and it's in your notes, but I want to read to you just a couple sentences that is in my book, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect, that kind of sets the foundation for what I want to do. If it is true that almost everything we become and accomplish in life is with and through other people, then the ability to connect and create a rapport with them is the most important skill that we can learn. I believe that with all of my heart. And when I'm in a Q&A period, and it's not on the subject of leadership, but it's on other things, one of the questions constantly asked of me is John, how did you learn to connect, and how did you learn to communicate with people? This is not in the book, and the reason it's not in the book is my publisher wanted it in the book, but I just felt uneasy about it because it sounds a little bit self-serving, because I'm going to really give you my journey. I'm going to talk about how I learned to connect with people, because it took me years. It wasn't a one-step, two-step process. But it's not in the book, but I wanted to add it. I wanted to add it so that I could teach it. I've never taught this before. Literally, I developed this lesson just maybe 6-7 weeks ago. So let's go with it. There are just some things I want to share with you of how I learned to connect with people. Number one, here we go. I understood the value of connecting with others. And then what's interesting is I understood the value of connecting with others at a very young age. And I don't know whether it's because I have some communication gifts that I was given by God, and so therefore it was always kind of apparent to me who connected and who didn't. But I can still remember being in my 3rd grade class and then going to my 4th grade class. Miss Stein was my 3rd grade teacher. Miss Tacey was my 4th grade teacher. And there's a world difference between those 2 years. I mean, okay, one's a little bit higher, I know that. But Miss Tacey, every kid in the class loved. I mean, this lady knew how to connect with her class. Miss Stein, totally opposite effect. And I can still remember being in the 4th grade and as a little kid saying, why is it that this teacher, everybody likes this teacher, and in my last year, no one liked that teacher? And I can still remember being in high school, you'll remember this, or maybe being in college, where you have several teachers maybe you can select for a course. Do you remember in college how you used to fight to get into somebody's class? I mean, you got 5 different teachers teaching the very same course. The credit's the credit, and hello, you got to pay for it regardless. But how everybody fought to get in somebody's. Now, why did we all fight to get in somebody's class, and we all kind of did everything we could not to get in someone else's class? Same subject, same school, same tuition, nothing changes, except one prof can connect, one cannot. I still remember even watching kids at recess. And why was it that some kids had other kids around them and they were just absolutely having a good time together, and then you see some kids and they were just over there by themselves? And I remember looking at them and say, why don't those kids connect with other kids? When I realized I was going to go into the ministry, I became greatly concerned because I was used to preachers that were boring. And I can remember thinking, God's called me to bore people. God's called me to get up and say things that people can't understand in such a way that they don't care. And I remember how great concern to me, because I thought, this is not a good thing. And I don't know if I want to be like that, because basically the models that I had pretty much were those that weren't really not effective in their connecting and communication skills. And so at a very young age, even though I didn't understand how to connect, I understood, I mean at a very elementary age, I understood that some people connected and some people didn't, and those that connected were successful, and those that did not connect were not as successful, period. Case dismissed. I knew that in elementary school. And it within me gave me a desire to say, I've got to figure this out. I don't know how to do it, but I got to figure it out. Now, the second thing I'm going to share with you on my journey of connecting was a mistake, okay? It's the only kind of negative example, but I've got to put it in there because it was such a problem for me that I have to pass it on to you with integrity and authenticity. Number two, I tried to imitate connectors that I admired. The few, again, my world was the pastor world, okay? The few that I knew that were good, I thought I got to become like them. And I can still remember, there was a guy named Charlie Williams, and I'm telling you, the guy was just, he was just great to look at. He was a good-looking guy, and I mean, he was massive, and he kind of looked like he was a bodybuilder, and I mean, you know, I don't know if he was a great preacher, but everybody just thought he was great just to look at him, okay? And he was an orator, major orator. And I thought, okay, I've got to learn how to do oratory. And so as a very young pastor, I tried that. And I memorized by the hour phrases so that I could say things like, I've been to Vermont, where I've seen the daffodils tucked down by the green hillside. And I just talk about these, and I use this phraseology, and I was so bad at it, I would mess it up every time. And I'd have rose bushes tucking down azaleas or something, and it was not my gift. And I remember I would try it, and I would retry it, and I would memorize. I remember there was a guy named Lawrence Hicks one time who preached a message, a great orator, there must be a heaven somewhere. And he preached it with a southern drawl. I even got the southern drawl down. And I preached this, there must be a heaven somewhere. When I went to my second church, to get into churches, you had what they called trial sermons. You had to go do a sermon, and the people sat there, and they kind of decided if they wanted you to be the pastor based upon your sermon. Now, that's a stupid way to pick a pastor, but you got to understand, I grew up with a bunch of wonderful, stupid people. So, I mean, it really works in that context. And I remember I went to that church, and I really wanted to go to that church, so I preached, there must be a heaven somewhere. And I mean, they thought I was an orator. Now, what they didn't understand was the only message I had. You understand that? You know, next week I'm going to be preaching, there must be a sermon somewhere. You know what I'm saying? And I haven't been able to find it, but I'm sure it's somewhere here. But I made a huge mistake. I tried to imitate people that I admired, or people that I thought could communicate. There was another guy that memorized scripture. Never took his Bible, just get up, kind of lean on the pulpit, and he just quoted scripture. So I thought, man, I'll memorize scriptures. I memorized 1 John and 2 John. You notice I started with small books. I didn't want to go with anything huge and big. And I would get up and I would try to quote scripture, and I would mess it up every time. And I saw it wasn't who I was. Now, in your notes, I said something, I put in there something that I love by Joyce Meyer. God will help you be all you can be, but he'll never help you be somebody else. I really believe that. I had to, in my communication and connecting, come to grips with the fact there were a lot of gifts in connecting and communication that I did not possess, and I was never going to be like those people. So number three, I determined to be myself and to build on my strengths. Woody Allen one time said, my only regret in life is that I'm not somebody else. And I think we've all felt that. Doris Mortman one time said, until you make peace with who you are, you'll never be content with what you have. As a young kid trying to communicate and connect, still looking to find my way, this took me years. This is not something I got quickly. My question went from, what do they have that I want? In other words, how do they communicate so I can learn how to do it that way, to what do I have that people will want? And I just totally changed the question. What's within me? What do I have? What gifts do I have? Abilities do I have to help me to connect that people would want? And I'll tell you what I did. This is the most fun part maybe of the lesson for me, because I can still remember about 21, 22, still very young in my communication. I remember it dawned on me one day. No one taught me this, but one day in my searching to learn how to connect, it dawned on me that if I was going to connect, I had to find out what was within me, the strengths that was within me, and somehow use that into my connecting repertoire. And I slowly began over the next couple, 3 years to find out what is innately John Maxwell that allows me to have authenticity when I communicate and connect in such a way that it touches people's lives and allows me to plug into them, the listener. Over about a 3-4 year period, I hit it. And this was huge in my turn to learning how to connect. There are 5 things that are just me. Now, there may be you too, but I can tell you, they are me. And I don't have to imitate anybody. It's just who I am and what I do, and it's just who I am. And I began to inject it into my communication, and it really helped me to connect. Number 1 is humor. I enjoy my audience. I enjoy my subject. I enjoy myself when I speak. I mean, no one needs to feel sorry for me when I'm communicating. I love this right here. I don't get nervous. I don't get, dear God, and all of a sudden I realized in my communication and connecting, because it's who I am, I see humor in about everything. I think all of us ought to laugh at ourselves because people have for years. So I think we might as well loosen up a little bit. And all of a sudden I began to understand that to use humor when I connect, really, because that's who I was. And it was very easy for it to spill out naturally in my life. So I began to say, then this is one area that I need to inject in my sharing. Number 2, now this was the biggest battle of the 5, authenticity. I can still remember in my first church, teaching expositionally out of the scripture and getting into areas of the Bible that I didn't live. Now, this is going to disappoint a lot of you, but I'm sorry. That's just who I am, and I don't always fulfill your expectations, and I surely don't fulfill mine. But when I would teach verse by verse, chapter by chapter, I'd get the passage of scripture that I was coming short in. And I still remember trying to teach that stuff, and it was so hollow inside of me. And I remember coming to about my second year of pastoring, coming to a very important decision in my life, and I'll tell you what it was. I said, I will not teach or communicate what I truly either do not believe or do not understand. I'm just not going to go there. And I remember there were certain subjects, because of the denomination I grew up in, that I was just a little bit shaky on in those issues, and I would bring in a speaker to deal with the subject. I'd just bring him in and say, hey, it's yours, you know what I mean? I'll sit down in the front, I'll take notes, but I'm not going there. That was huge for me, because what it did is it allowed me, when I get up to communicate and speak, it allowed me to go open up all barrels and go for it, because if I'm going to teach it, if I'm going to pass it on, I'm going to live it. It's going to be who I am. It's going to be something that I have found really works in my life. Number 3 was confidence. I realized that was something that I naturally did well. I've always felt good about myself, and I've always felt good about others, and it's because of my home background, and I was just blessed, and I wish everybody would have had it, but they don't. But I don't have a confidence problem. And all of a sudden I realized that when I teach, when I connect, confidence is huge. And I find that when I work with people and I connect, when I speak to people, I so believe in them. And I just know they're going to make the right response. And I know they're going to make the right decision. And it never enters my mind that they're not going to make the right decision. And it allows me to connect in a way that I think that I would not connect if I didn't realize that's a strength that I have. Number 4 is hope. I naturally am an encourager. I'm a natural lifter. That's who I am. That's what I do. That's who I am. And all of a sudden I said, then let all of your communication have the sense of hope in it. Bring light, shed light in people's lives. And number 5, simplicity. It was an important day in my life when I came to the conclusion and I had a talk with myself. And basically the talk was, John Maxwell, you are not an intellectual. I'm not. I mean, I wish I was smart. I'd like to be smart. I see smart people and I say, dear God, I'd like to be smart. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not. I'm not an intellectual. Complex things just don't grab me. They really don't. I just raise my hand and say, I don't understand it. If you can't bring it down and get it simple for me, I'm not going to be able to do it real quick. And I remember when you went to school and you just had people teach you things and you'd say, could we break it down? And you know, do we have to confuse everybody all the time and be happy about it? Do you know? I'm simple. I'm very bottom line, simple, and kind of like here, can we not just kind of break it down? So, put the food on the lower shelf so everybody can have some. Don't stick it way up there and make them get a ladder. Now, this freed me up. When I said, okay, I can use humor, I'm only going to talk about the things I really have bought into, and it's the fact that I'm going to use the confidence that I have in people that will allow them to act upon that issue, and I'm going to always shed hope, and I'm going to be very simple. When I began to come to grips with this is who I am, and these are my strengths, and this is what has to be in my connecting, communication, teaching, everything began to turn positive for me. So here's just simple. Spend time and ask yourself, what are my strengths? Because you have them, and you got to find them. And once you find them, then you just literally inject that into your communication, because that's going to allow you to rise higher, because that's what you naturally are and that's what you naturally do. Number 4. The fourth thing I did in learning to connect, was I asked for feedback. Stephen Covey said it takes humility to seek feedback, and it takes wisdom to understand it, analyze it, and appropriately act on it. I sought feedback everywhere, every time, with everyone. I mean, when I was going to speak, anybody that I knew, I'd say, do me a favor. I don't care if you take notes, just listen to me and help me. Tell me what I don't do well. Give me some feedback. Tell me what I did well, but help me out. And I know I sought feedback because my father, who was a speaker and a communicator, he paid my brother and I 10 cents every time when we listened to him. If he had a grammatical error, if we could catch it, he'd pay us 10 cents. If he said something that really was good for the people and we caught it, and he taught us how to read communicators. And when we were kids in junior high, we went to church to hear my dad just because we needed money. And so we did that. I mean, and Larry and I get each other. We'd punch each other because he would only take one of our. So we couldn't both come and get 10 cents off the idea. So you know, he was bigger, so he got 2 to 1. I mean, we had a distribution system and the whole deal. But it taught me. And so when I started communicating, I said, listen to me, help me out, tell me what I did well, what didn't I do well? Give me feedback. When I hired Charlie Wetzel to write with me, because I was his pastor in San Diego, I had him every Sunday take notes, and on Monday, he and I would sit for 30 minutes on the phone and talk. And I would say, Charlie, what were my best 3 minutes in that message? What were my worst 3 minutes? When did people glaze over? And over that period of time, I taught him how to read a crowd. I taught him how to read a sermon. I taught him how to effectively realize what was good, what wasn't good. And because I understood. The only way he could ever write for me is to understand what works and what doesn't work. If you can't figure it out, I can promise you, you'll never learn how to connect if you cannot figure out what works well for you, what doesn't work well, what you got to change, the whole process in your notes. Non-connectors, these are people that are good people, they just can't connect, can tell if you disconnect, but only connectors can tell you why. Boy, did I discover that. And what I discovered is I don't need feedback. Then I began to get a little bit more careful about my feedback. I realized I needed feedback from people who knew how to connect themselves. That you don't need feedback from somebody that can't connect. You know, I don't mean this kindly. You don't need swimming lessons from a person that can't swim. You understand? And you don't need connecting lessons from a person that can't connect. And there are a whole bunch of people that communicate, and you know as well as I do, nobody's home. They've never been home, okay? Number 5, I studied the great connectors. And when I studied the great connectors, there were 2 questions I always asked. In fact, I still do this. I do this. I can't help myself. It's just who I am anymore. But I ask myself 2 questions when I sit there. And when anybody communicates, I ask myself 2 questions. How did the person connect? And how long did the person connect? The how is so key. People say, well, I really enjoyed the sermon. Well, that's nice. I enjoyed the sermon too. Okay. What made it enjoyable? How did they connect, and how long did that person connect? And I studied, now this is very dated because I'm older, much, much, much older than you. But I'm going to give you, I've never done this before. I'm going to give you the 5 people I studied. I studied 5 connectors, and I watched them, and I just studied them, and I could tell you anything you want to know about how they spoke and what made them good, what made them effective. But I watched 5 people and how they connect so that I could pull all the truth that I could out of it. Number 1, I watched Johnny Carson, Some of you don't even remember Johnny Carson. Phenomenal connector. And I loved it when he messed up. The guy, his visual expression when he messed up. When you see me visually express like that, I learned that from Carson. I can promise you right now. The guy, in fact, I prayed every night, God, let him mess up. Because when he messed up, he'd shrug his shoulders, he'd look at Doc and the band, and he'd kind of look like, who said this and what's happened? And he'd do a little shuffle step, and you know what I mean? The guy was just phenomenal when he messed up. He just taught me how to take, because all connectors have low points. He just taught me how to pull myself right out of that mess. I studied him. John F. Kennedy. I have probably watched and listened to 100 speeches of John F. Kennedy. In fact, when I still go to D.C., I go to the Smithsonian, and I go in there and I go to the section where he says we're going to put a man on the moon. But the man was such an inspiration as far as a connector and communicator, and nobody, only Ronald Reagan could do a press conference as good as JFK. The guy absolutely could take the mean-spirited questions of the press corps, and he just had a phenomenal ability of turning them to his advantage. Now, the third person, you don't even, most of you won't even know him unless you grew up in Ohio, but Woody Hayes, Ohio State football coach. Hey, the most passionate man I've ever known. He was also one of the most insane people. But Woody Hayes, when he talked football, he'd always tell stories. He loved military history. And just Woody Hayes, I mean, he was just all wrapped up in it. And he had kind of a lisp when he talked. And he just could go on and on about victory and how America won the war and how it somehow was Ohio State. And it was kind of the same. Jesus, God, Ohio State, America, and prosperity for the world. And I just loved it. Zig Ziglar, I owe so much to that man. Everything I know about timing, pausing, walking, visually, anything that I do visually that intersects without conversation, Zig Ziglar was my source. I just absolutely learned so much from him. The last person was my dad. My dad has a spirit that is greater than his content. And I wish I could do 30 minutes on that subject alone. A spirit greater than his content. When you finish with my dad, you don't walk out and say, wow, the message was phenomenal. You walk out and say, the experience was phenomenal. Because the man in his spirit is greater than his content. And I learned that is a transferable concept in connecting. Okay, enough of that. Let's go to number 6. Number 6, I did my homework. In other words, once I began to understand communication, connecting, I said, okay, I'm going to pay my price. I'm going to do everything I can to get to my level. Now, in your notes, if gifted, if you do nothing, you'll be in the top 50%. You with me? I mean, you remember the kids that never had to study in school? You follow me? They were just gifted. I mean, they're going to get A's. They're going to get A's. Okay. So if you're gifted, you don't even have to do anything. You'll be in. If you're gifted and you do something, you'll be in the top 10%. But if you're gifted and you do everything, you'll be in the top 1%. And this is the key. Finding your giftedness and then 100%. I had a wonderful mentor, Fred Smith, who died a couple years ago. I think it was 92, just a precious mentor of mine. And I remember him seeing me, talking to me, I don't know, in the early 1980s. And he said, John, you're very gifted. And then he looked at me right in the eye. I said, look at me, John. Don't take shortcuts. You're very gifted. Don't take shortcuts. Because he said it happens all the time. He said the gifted always take shortcuts. Because they can goof off, give 80%, still win. And he said if you really want to get in that 1%, give it. So what I'm saying to you is this. In your strength zone, whether it's connecting, communicating, whatever it is, you got to always do your homework. In the things that you do well, you got to do it with 100% of your effort. Now, in your weaknesses, take shortcuts. And the things that you don't do well, go find somebody else to help you, delegate. I literally, I understand this world very, very well because there are so many areas I'm not good at. And I learned very quickly, listen to me very carefully, you have no business doing something you're not good at because you're not good at it and you bore people while you do it and you're not effective and you're average, so stop it. You can't be successful in it. So why stay in it? But in the areas of your giftedness, in the areas of your strength, that's where you do your homework, that's where you pay your price, that's where you don't take shortcuts. Every message I've ever preached, I write it out. I file it. I record it. I've never taken shortcuts. Not in this area, because I know I'm good in this area. Now, a whole bunch of areas, I'm not going to do any work on because I'm not any good at it, so why would I stay in it? But in the area of your strength, do your homework, prepare, pay the price, whatever it is, because that's what's going to give you the return. The three-step process for me in communication and material is very simple. I develop it, number one. And in developing my material, that takes a lot of time for creativity. It's very time-consuming. So the only way I can develop good material is to know what I want to produce and then do it over months. So I incubate continually material. I can't imagine anybody saying, I'm going to preach a sermon next week. Here's the subject. Now I think I'll go find material. Dear God, it can't be good. It's too fast. So how do you develop material? It's very simple. You got to incubate it. You got to understand that if you know where you're going, that's why when I pastored, I always had 3 months out on all my sermons. In fact, I would put them, back then we had hymnals. Remember when we had hymnals? How ridiculous. Remember when we had hymnals? I would literally put the next 3 months of every sermon I was going with the scripture and everything on the hymnal so that people, when they come in with the hymnal, it'd be a wraparound deal so they'd know what I'm speaking on the next 3 months. And I did that because I knew that if I did that, that would keep driving me to continually work and develop material. And so you develop material by knowing where, and you just keep throwing stuff in the pot as you develop it. And you know, you don't put it together until maybe 2 or 3 weeks before, but you've got to let it have some time. So development is where the creativity comes in. And here's what I know about creativity. Creativity can never be rushed. There's no such thing as cramming and getting creative. You can cram and be desperate, but you can't cram and be creative. So number one is develop it. Number two is deliberate it. I think this is the part that's missed more than anything else. After it is developed, it has to have X amount of time to be marinated in my soul. I have to have, if I'm teaching a lesson, I have to have time to let it soak in to me. That's why I have to have the lesson done usually 3 to 4 weeks ahead of time, because it can't marinate correctly if I don't have that kind of time with it. It just can't. I've never been able, and so here's what happens when I don't deliberate a message. I shortchange the people because I don't take, here's the point, very simple. When you get a thought, when I get a thought, the one thing I know about the thought you get or the thought I get in the beginning is it's never a mature, completed thought. It isn't. And if you think it is, you're fooling yourself. So how do you get a great thought? You get a great thought by having time to work it. How will I say it? How will I deliver it? What does that mean to me? How does that change me? How does that affect what I'm doing? How does that affect what people are going to do? And the longer you have with a thought, that's why thinking time is so essential for a connector. You just I have to have it. I have to have more than most people, I think. But to deliberate over it brings a maturity to it, just like there's a creativity that comes in the developing part. So the creative part is out there just snatching stuff and putting it into different categories and saying, I'm going to give this some time to see what bubbles up. And then then you go and you start deliberating and you say, now this is for me. This I have to soak this in so that when I'm up, and here's the key. When you're connecting, it should soak out of you. It should just literally drip off of you if it's done right. Thirdly is you deliver it. And I find that I can deliver it with great security and confidence if I've had time with the first two. The delivery part is just the easy part. It's kind of like, okay, if I've done the other two well, the delivery is just what I'm going to do. Okay, number 7. The 7th thing that helped me with connecting, I love this one because this is so truthful. It's not going to help you any, but it's just so truthful. I got lucky. And I know you're writing that down and say, well, okay, well, how do I get lucky? And I'll define luck. Luck equals preparation intersecting opportunity. But I got lucky. I really got lucky. And so I'm going to take 3 minutes and tell you the story that really was the thing that took me over the top. I think to connect well with people, you have to be comfortable on the inside. I've never known a person that can connect that was uncomfortable. So you have to be able to, before you speak or teach, you have to feel comfortable yourself. And I started off because I started off in the ministry. So again, contextually, as you watch the DVD or listen to the audio, you got to understand, my world was preaching. Your world may not be that, but it doesn't matter. Your world is, you still have to learn how to communicate and connect. So in my world, it was a big pulpit with a big voice. And it was kind of authoritarian, and that's how I started. And so that's how I began, and that's what I do. And I found out the longer I did it, that this wasn't who I was. And I can remember very simply, I can remember the day where I had the big pulpit moved and I put a little cross up front. It was still pulpit so that the Christians wouldn't feel that I'd gone liberal. But it was small, you know what I mean? So now I could kind of look out there and see people, and when you have the big one, you could be as naked as a jaybird, nobody know, you know what I'm saying? You could, and if the Indians are coming, you could hide down in the fort and they never see you for a week or two, you know what I'm saying? So I went from the big one down to something a little, and I can remember when I went to a smaller pulpit, guess what happened? I got a realistic voice. I didn't get a realistic voice as long as I could hide behind something. But the moment that it became the fact that I'm going to have to be in front of people, all of a sudden there was a realism in what I said and a realism in my voice. Then I went to no pulpit, where I just kind of walk around and I would teach. And every step, by the way, every step that I was doing this, it got more comfortable. But let me tell you something. This took me from 1969 to where I'm going. From 1969 to 1983. It took me 14 years to finally find, and I'll tell you, and you know where I'm going, sitting on a bar stool. This is me. And let me tell you what happened. Back in the early 80s when I lived out in San Diego, I played a lot of racquetball, and it was in a racquetball tournament, and I went for a low shot, and I pulled the lower part of my back out real bad. I mean, I'm talking about real bad. I'm talking about serious pain, doctors, chiropractors, the whole works, and for 5 days I couldn't. I laid in bed, just trying. It was bad pull. Well, about a week after that, I was supposed to be in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at a conference, speaking. And I thought, man, how am I going to pull this one off? And finally I said, Mark, you're going to have to go with me because I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't dress myself. I said, you're going to have to help me. And so I had my assistant say, look, he's going to come, but he won't be able to stand. He needs to have a stool, a bar stool, something high so I could know I wouldn't have to go all the way down, something that he can sit on. And I went to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and had a bar stool for me, and I sat, back then I was, very dumb. I did 3-day conferences. Can you imagine 3-day conferences? Yeah, that's what happens when you have high energy and low IQ. But anyway. And for 3 days, I've got to do this teaching, and I'm on a bar stool, and I start teaching. And I'm thinking, man, this is going so good. We're going back to the airport, and I said, Margaret, I've never had energy like this after I spoke. I said, and I'm still trying to search it. And she said, John, could it be the fact you sat down almost the whole time? And that was the day I realized 2 things. If I sit down, I conserve energy. But number 2 is I'm conversational, and that's who I am. And that fits me. The bar stool, hey, don't go out and say, dear God, I figured it out. I'm getting a bar stool. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going, no. But I'm here to tell you something. People can tell when you're comfortable yourself when you communicate with them. And they can also tell when you're not comfortable. And I got lucky. I literally got lucky. And then I realized sitting and teaching has a very calming effect on people. I can still remember being in Indianapolis, speaking for Promise Keepers to that packed stadium, and they turned 10,000 away at that one. And I was speaking on an issue that was very difficult for guys anyway, moral purity. I mean, just a real issue that every one of us battle. And I could still remember going and sitting on the end of the stage, and for 15 minutes talking to 75,000 people, sitting on a stage about how I had these issues and had to pray through them, and how men began to just openly weep. And I've had people come to me and they say, I was at Indianapolis when you preached that message. And here's what's amazing. They'll say, and John, there was something about when you sat down with us that day that you started talking just to me. So I got lucky. If I would have had the racquetball problem, I don't think I'd ever started sitting on a stool, to be honest with you. I don't think I was that smart. I kept knowing intuitively I needed to go somewhere else with it, but I couldn't figure it out. But, the racquetball, so, God and racquetball injuries are what I owe it all to. Number 8, I left my comfort zone. I left my comfort zone. If I always do what I've always done, I'll always get what I've always gotten. At a very young age, I was thrust on stages with people that were better speakers than I was. Again, you have to be in my kind of background. I mean, somebody like Don or Tom would know. Maybe you got to be. When I was 28, I was on the platform with Robert Lee, the great Memphis Southern Baptist preacher who was an orator who preached a message called Payday Someday 10,000 times around the world. And here he is. He's in his early 70s and has this masterpiece. And the only thing I requested when I knew I was going on the same stage is I said, let me go first. Just let me go first. And so I go, and then I can go hide in the broom closet. You understand the whole process. I'll never forget, he was so kind to me. He said, John, when I got done, he said, let's get our picture taken together. One of my prized possessions, picture. He said, let's go to the airport together. Let's have breakfast together. That precious guy spent time with me. But I remember when I was at the Conference of Biblical Exposition when I was 32 on the stage with John Stott. And I thought, what in the heck am I doing here? I'm over my head. One of the greatest things that ever happened to me was go to California, to get away from the Midwest and get away from the camp meetings and the stuff that I grew up with that was so cultural. And you go out there and I mean, they didn't know any. I remember when I got up and I spoke to my congregation. Bill Gaither called one day and said, John, he said, I want to bring the band out. We're going to do a West Coast tour. Could we speak at your church or sing at your church? I said, Bill, I'd love to have you. I remember getting up and saying, Bill Gaither's coming out with his band and they're going to be out here and we're going to have a Sunday night with them and a big concert. And I remember people just looking at me. And all of a sudden it hit me. I said, would you raise your hand if you've ever heard of Bill Gaither? And 6 hands went up. See, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It got me totally out of all that stuff that kind of keeps many times pastors in that field from ever being effective community. I mean, I got out there where you just had to be who you were, and you couldn't rely on the culture to bring you through. And then when I started speaking internationally, again, it just took me completely out of my comfort zone because you lose rhythm and you got to use translators. And again, it took me so long to learn how to do that. And then I remember when I crossed over to the secular community, the biggest deep dive I ever took was when I went into the business community. Do you realize every illustration I had got dumped? Do you realize that 95% of everything I ever taught I couldn't use? And again, it allowed me, it caused me to dig more than I've ever had to dig before because I was over my head. And I don't know about you, but you know what? I won't dig like I have to unless I'm over my head. You know what I'm saying? As long as I can stand on the bottom, I have a tendency to kind of bounce around and play a little bit. Number 9, I practiced. You know, it's true that we play at the level of our practice. And I began to really develop a practice level for connecting. And when people talk about my ability to connect, and I know it's a strong gift that I have, I understand that completely. I look up and say, I certainly ought to be able to. I've taught, I've taught and I've spoken 15,000 times. I mean, hello, if you can't do it after 15,000 times, jump off a bridge, you know what I'm saying? Give it up, give it up. But here's the practice level I work on in connecting. Number one, know my subject. Just if you've done it long enough, you'll know the subject. Number two, know my audience. I still practice when I travel pre-calls. I never go anywhere to speak without talking to the person at least a week to 10 days ahead of time to get their expectations. What do you want? What are you looking for? What can I say that's going to help you when I get there? And they, a lot of times they don't ask for it. They don't have. It doesn't matter. I'm not doing it because they ask for it or don't ask for it. I'm doing it because I need it. Because if I'm going to go there and I'm going to really help them, I've got to know exactly where they are. And number three, know myself. And when I say know myself, let me say this. I cannot effectively connect with people on a subject unless it's connected with me. I don't do well transferring knowledge that has not somehow been embedded in who I am. And so when I say know self, what I'm saying is I've got to know myself enough to say, how in the world is what I'm teaching, how is this affecting me? And here's what I've discovered. Until it affects me, it won't affect the people I'm teaching it to. Knowledge transferred is quite worthless. Number 10, just give 100% every time. Don't cheat. Just don't cheat. Not in your strengths. Number 5, strive for continuous improvement. Continuous improvement. My kids last Christmas gave me some audio programs of the 100 greatest speeches ever given. And I'm going through it for the second time. I can't get enough of it. Because every time I listen to these great speeches and these great speakers, it teaches me something. Continually improve. Finally, number 10. And this one is very personal. And if you're watching again the audio or watching the DVD or listening to the audio, again, understand my background and who I am and my context, okay? So be patient with me. I can only teach out of what I know. I can't teach of where I haven't been. But number 10 is, I believe, absolutely essential to be a great communicator. I am not the main attraction. I may deliver the goods, but I'm not the goods. And I better understand the difference between those two. In my teaching, a lot of it is faith building, and so I can present God. And what I got to understand is, I am the communicator. That is an absolute fact. But I'm not the main attraction. He is. And what I've got to do is I got to make sure in all of my connecting that is very, very obvious. And when I talk about I deliver the goods, I'm not the goods. I just deliver the goods. The goods are the principles, the God values, the ideas. These are the things that help people. And you got to be able to communicate them, but begin to understand that you're not that you're not the reason. If the lesson is great, you're not the reason the lesson is great. It's because the subject you had was a great subject, and you handled it correctly. Let me close with something that I debated about doing it, but I just have to do it because it's who I am, and so just bear with me, okay? It's just, I read this every month. I pull this out. I've got a filing system, and I have certain things that I pull out on periodic basis to read, to remind myself. And I read this every month, and it's just perfect for me, so let me give it to you, and you'll find it hopefully a little bit humorous, and I hope you won't find it sacrilegious, but it's just me. So my name's John, okay? And I'm your friend. It was the first Palm Sunday. Here came Jesus riding in Jerusalem on an ass. Great crowds began to shout, Hosanna, Hosanna. Some threw down their coats on the road. Others spread out palm branches. The ass perked up his ears. Wow, he said, I had no idea they thought so well of me. Get the point? If anyone comes to you after you've sung a song or preached a sermon or done some kind or noble deed and says, wow, that was terrific, they're not actually saying Hosanna to you. You're just the ass who carried Jesus. I'm not the main attraction. 10 things that taught me how to connect with people. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it.
All right, let's see who made it all the way through. I know that was very long, but let me tell you guys something. You just got a master class from one of the best communicators in the world on how he learned to communicate. So you can't ask for anything better than to have that opportunity to just sit and listen to someone teach you